Today I want to continue our study in the book of James. You'll remember that prior to the Christmas season, we completed our study of the tongue and what James had to say about learning how to control it. In our time together, I want us to begin looking at the next topic that James discusses in this short book, which we've called the Christian's Handbook, because it gives us the instructions on how we are to live our lives. Now, in chapter 3, James begins to reveal the character of wisdom and how it should impact our behavior. And I've titled this topic, Earning Your Learner's Permit for Life. Earning your learner's permit for life. And he begins this new topic with a pop quiz. Now, are you ready? Now, some of you may be saying, well, Steve, I'm only auditing this course. No quizzes for me. Well, I'm sorry to inform you, but you can't audit the book of James. You have to do the homework and take the exams if you want to grow up in your relationship with God. Now, here's the pop quiz question in verse 13 of chapter 3. James asked, "Who among you is wise and understanding?" In other words, James says, is there anybody among you whom you would consider to be wise and understanding? Now, you can just imagine the buzz that's going on in the assembly as people begin looking around, maybe nudging each other a little bit or kind of gently pointing towards someone over there or maybe someone, back there. But James is really asking here more of an individual or a personal question. That you could rewrite this question to express it this way. To you and I specifically, are you wise and understanding? Am I wise and understanding? And James is actually anticipating that everyone in the assembly is going to raise their hand and say something like this. I don't want to be presumptuous here, and I'm not, saying I'm as wise as I'd like to be, but, I think I've got a handle on it. I'm a fairly intelligent person. You see, James knows that nobody's going to raise their hand and say, not me, I'm an idiot. I'll just go sit in the back of the room while you work with all the wise folks, all the wise people up front. No, James knows that just about everybody in the assembly will hear or read verse 13, who among you is wise and understanding? And they're going to whisper to themselves in their heart, I may not be as wise as, some of the Christians I know, but I'm certainly way ahead of a bunch of people that are sitting around me today. Sure, there've been times that I have to admit I've acted like a fool, but not all the time. For the most part, I've got a good grip on things. I'm pretty bright. I'm in church, aren't I? After all, that should give me some tokens, shouldn't it? I've earned something, right? So count me in with this wise group. And so with all of us answering in the positive or the affirmative, which James anticipates that we're all going to do, you see what he's really done here is he's set us up. He's set every one of us up. And he's kind of painted us into this corner. And now he follows up the pop quiz question by effectively saying to us, well, thank you for raising your hand. So let me describe a wise person, and why don't you see how you measure up? Oh, geez, thanks, James. So now we're probably all thinking to ourselves, well, why did I bother to raise my hand? Hey, can I change my answer? I want to go sit in the back now. Well, James says it's too late. And besides, if you want to grow up in Christ, mature spiritually in your life, if you want to learn how to handle the maze of life, then you need to take note of what true wisdom and understanding look like and see how you measure up. Now, before we start our engines today, let's make sure that we have a grip on what James is referring to when he uses the words wise and understanding, which, by the way, is the only time in the entire New Testament where these two words appear together, wise and understanding. Let's start first then with wisdom. Now, you might remember the first and only other time that James used the word wisdom in this book was back in chapter 1 in our study. And it was in verse 5 of that chapter where James writes this: "But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God." You see, we're not given a description by James of what wisdom is in this verse. We're just told that we need it and we can ask for it. And then James uses it again a second time here in chapter 3. Now, the word wisdom is sophos, sophos. And the Greeks used it as a general word for knowledge or theory or philosophy. In fact, you can hear the Greek word sophos in philosophy, in our word philosophy. And the Jews actually deepened the meaning of this word to refer to the application of theory, or as we would put it, or the application of knowledge. Literally bringing knowledge to life, applying it in the way that we live. You see, knowledge alone or by itself isn't wisdom. Facts by themselves are not sufficient. James is not equating wisdom with your knowledge about something. He isn't tying wisdom to your intellect or your diploma that's hanging on the wall. And the truth is, there are plenty of really smart fools living today with brilliant minds and brilliant IQs, but they are very far from God. You know, Solomon wrote as a young man, as a young king in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, that a relationship with God is the beginning point for someone to acquire genuine wisdom in their life. That's where it starts. You must have a relationship with God as the beginning point to acquire genuine wisdom in your life. You see, you can't have true wisdom without a relationship with God. You can be smart without God, but we're not talking about your GPA here. Because true wisdom is the ability to construct or build a life that's worth living. You see, a wise person doesn't have to get past the 8th grade, which is where many of our grandparents and great-grandparents stopped their education in the 1800s and early 1900s. And yet what godly, wise lives many of them constructed for us to see and to follow their example. Just read the book of Romans chapter 1 in the New Testament, where unbelievers reject the truths about God and his creative power and his revelation of the truth and the gospel, and then turn around and proclaim themselves to be wise apart from God. And Paul writes, they have become fools instead by their actions. And the word for fool in the book of Romans chapter 1 verse 22 that Paul uses is the Greek word moreno. Moreno, which gives us our English word moron. Now, can you imagine that? It's possible to be a brilliant moron. And that's exactly the contrast that James has in mind in Romans chapter 1, where Paul is writing, is the same as what James has here in chapter 3. Because a wise person in the mind of James in chapter 3 is someone who is taking the knowledge of God's truth and applying it to their life. So in biblical terminology, wisdom is taking the knowledge you have and putting things together in your life. Now, James also uses, as we said, the word understanding. Who among you is wise or living with wisdom and understanding? Now, those words might sound redundant, like they're the same, very similar, but they really are distinct. And this is actually the only time, by the way, this word appears in the entire New Testament, the word understanding. This particular word that's used in the Greek for understanding and is translated that way. Now, the word understanding was used in James' time, James' generation, for someone who was becoming a specialist in a particular field or practice. They were literally, becoming skilled through the practice of their wisdom. So wisdom is knowing the truth and applying it, the knowledge, but understanding is becoming a specialist. So becoming skilled by means of practicing that wisdom. And wisdom, of course, is taking knowledge and applying it to their life, that truth in your life. But understanding is becoming skilled in the practice of that wisdom. Now think about it this way. When you got your driver's license, you finished learning a lot of things about a number of subjects. For example, the laws of the road, the operation of a vehicle, etc. We could go on. And you also took a driver's education class. And your instructor was a man or a woman so desperate for money that he or she risked their life with a car full of 16-year-olds and actually, believe it or not, let them drive. And you were part of one of those classes. I mean, you've seen the cars. You've been in the cars. They had that sign that says student driver. And they drive by and you see that kid is holding onto the steering wheel with both hands, sitting up close to the steering wheel, and there's a man or a woman in the passenger seat in absolute terror. Well, eventually, through that process, we all got our learner's permit. And to be honest, that was one of the happiest days of our life. At least, I'm assuming it was yours because it was mine. I mean, what joy, right? Think about it, because now we got to terrorize our parents, legitimately. There's a true story about a young man in New York who was walking down the street, a teen, in broad daylight when he was jumped by two guys. And they demanded that he give them his wallet, but this young man, this teenager, refused. So they actually pulled out a gun and they threatened him, and he still refused. And so they jumped him and tried to get his wallet out of his pocket, but he fought back ferociously. Well, finally, some other people who saw what was going on and saw the attack came by to help this young man, and his would-be assailants, these thieves, ran away. And they said to him, well, why didn't you just give them your wallet? And he said, because my learner's permit is in there. You see, that young man would rather die than not be able to drive. Now, it's been said that the vast majority of accidents occur in the very first year of someone driving a car. So, if we can just skip that first year of driving, our chances of having an accident just went down drastically. But you see, the truth is we can't, can we? We all need that time behind the wheel so that we can become skilled at it. We can have an understanding of what driving really entails and is all about as we apply wisdom. And as we practice that wisdom, we have more understanding that's gained. We become skilled at it. And you need to take all the knowledge you've learned about cars, the law, the road system, and not only apply it, the wisdom, but then focus that knowledge on your neighborhood streets by getting into the car, gripping the wheel, and practicing your skill set. You see, that's understanding. And when you become a Christian, in a certain way, you got a spiritual learner's permit. And you soon discovered the complications and the challenges of growing up in Christ and maturing as a Christian. It's not always easy. There's some difficulties along the way. You see, all of your knowledge in driving and the skill to apply it is constantly tested when you're driving a vehicle. Why? Because the scenery is always changing when you're behind the wheel of a car. Every situation is unique and different. The road is always twisting and turning, and if you're going to drive, the car can't stay in park, can it? And not only that, there are other people on the road, and they're moving too. So we have to learn the art of navigation as we drive in order to avoid danger. And just as driving is dangerous, so is Christianity. You see, the trouble is, too many Christians kind of want to stay in the garage, you know? And James is telling us here that in order to grow up in our Christian life, we can't stay in our garage or driveway, spiritually speaking. We have to take what we know about our walk with Christ, and we have to take that out on the open road, so to speak. And yes, there may be accidents and difficulties and rough spots along the way. But as a Christian, we have to stay at it. We have to continue to live the Christian life. We have to continue to do and apply the knowledge that we have because we're developing wisdom. And the more we apply that wisdom and knowledge we have, that understanding, it's amazing what begins to transform in our lives, because both the application of knowledge and the development of skill, the wisdom and the understanding, is exactly what James has in mind for every one of us as believers. Now, the next question that we need to answer is this: how can you tell if you're getting better at it? What are the mile markers that show progress as we grow up in our walk with God? Well, in verse 13, James will answer that question. Notice again, he says, "Who among you is wise and understanding?" We just discussed what that means. Now he says, "Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom." James provides here what we call two visible mannerisms of a wise person. Two visible mannerisms of a wise person. And this is where we will pick up next week as we continue to study this topic, earning your learner's permit for life.